Connect Run Club podcast, episode number 101, Running Around the World with David Bishop. Hey, welcome back, runners, to the Connect Run Club podcast, episode 101, and it's almost that out there in temperature. Did you hear it, Rio, yesterday? It was 95 degrees when they were doing some of those yesterday morning.
It's too hot.
That's crazy.
Was it you that were telling me that the marathon should be a winter Olympic sport?
I read an article about the other day.
Was that in our last
it's a great
episode?
idea.
Okay,
yeah.
that's a great idea.
I'm trying to remember. I don't even think we talked about it on here, but I read an article the other day making the recommendation, because if you think about all of the most competitive and big city races, they're all done in cooler conditions.
Yep.
And if you ask these athletes, hey, would you rather run
Right.
when it's 30 or 80? I know the answer, and it's not.
And all
80.
the I guess not world records, but maybe world records are set when it's cold.
Mm-hmm.
Like they talked about the sub 2 hour, it would have to be like almost close to freezing in like in Berlin or somewhere, some flat course. So.
Yeah, and it makes it more competitive, because I don't know if you watch the marathon, the women's marathon, the field got depleted to 6.
Yeah.
Just so quickly. And it makes it to a point where it's all of a sudden you're like, hey, I know who's going to win this race rather quickly. Whereas if you watch the New York City Marathon, man, they're running together a big pack of them, mile 15, mile 16, mile 17, so till someone makes a move. But the herd thinned out really, really quick. And just looking at the forecast for this weekend, I'll tell you what, I feel bad for the men, because it's going to be awful. I wish they'd started a couple hours early just for them. But
yeah, we are recording this on a Tuesday, the same day this interview is going out. So Tuesday of week 2 of the Olympics, and we had a sweep of the Americans last night in the 100-meter hurdles. And did you know the third place bronze is from Douglasville, Georgia, and my wife went to high school with her.
Wow.
Yeah. So she
really
trains
cool.
in California or something now. So.
Man, that's really interesting. I think we were also talking this morning, how many of these, I want to know how many athletes have won gold medals that actually live in the United States.
Yeah, that's so frustrating. It's like, and this person from Kenya, but they train in Michigan, or like this swimmer is at Stanford. It's like, why aren't you on our team?
Mo Farah. When's the last time you've actually been to Great Britain, Mo?
We should do it by the percentage of your last year or your training that you spent in that country is who you should train for, not your nationality. We would dominate even more in basketball. Although I guess last night was good, but
finally they looked good last night.
Yeah, but it's been interesting.
But I tell you the other breakthroughs, and I think someone mentioned on the Facebook group. So if you're not a member of the Facebook group, what's wrong with you?
ConnectRunClub.com/Facebook.
Come on.
You can join 1,000 of your closest friends.
Exactly.
You can see a guy that was running across an aircraft carrier for his 5K.
How crazy was that?
Yeah.
I was like picture of the week.
Yeah.
But talking about breakthroughs in the steeplechase this week, Evan Jager taking the silver. He ran one of the best steeplechases I've ever seen American run. I mean, and he ran a strategic race. The pace was slowing down, and he knew he didn't have to kick everybody else, so he decided, hey, we're going to push the pace for a little bit, and that's what won him the silver medal. Great race. And then Emma Coburn. So it has been and then Ashton Eaton with the decathlon.
Yep.
So even though it hasn't been a banner meet for some of the sprinters, it has been a great meet for some athletes. And I'm with Emma and Evan Jager, as I hope and I only pray that some of the unique performances they're putting on pique some kids' interest in the steeplechase, because it really is a fun event to watch.
Yep.
It really is. And then Ashton Eaton, I mean, he's an absolute stud. I mean, that guy, he's crazy. And if you've seen some of the times they've been putting up, so like,
quick.
Yeah, I mean, at 10:3, 100 meters, and then they go and do 9 more events after that. I mean, that's just...
How fast could you do 100 meters?
Oh, my goodness.
We need to make that an episode, is just the audio recording of us both doing the 100 to see what our time should be.
But behind me, you would see like nuts and bolts and screws coming off behind
your
me.
spine is like outside of your body. Yeah. That'd be rough. Another fun part from last night. I know this is a longer intro, but it's the Olympics, guys. So
yeah, let's talk about
only
the Olympics.
once every 4 years. Was who was running with Usain Bolt?
Oh, it was the Canadian guy.
What's his name?
He probably lives in the United States, of course.
He probably does, yeah.
I don't know.
When they were, because Bolt was starting to pull off, and then he just started to push it, and they just just laughing at each other. And they were so far ahead, they were just like, "Is this even like a competition for you guys?" So it was that was a fun one too. I tell you that picture And then the other picture from him winning the 100 and he's looking back grinning have been some of my favorites from the Olympics. So
yeah, I mean, here's the thing: whether you like him or not, he is electrifying. He's fun to watch, and you can't but help but smile when you look at him having that much fun. And the other one I felt bad for, and I know you've talked about it, was Justin Gatlin, and I'm hoping his ankle was bothering him. I assume it was because he didn't look good from the get-go.
Yeah.
He's never been that far behind, and I know he looked to the side. They want to make a big deal of that, but he could not have been feeling good because his time just, as you saw, it was a slow race. So I feel bad that he's not going to be in that 200.
And those commentators are giving him a hard time. They're like, "Hey kids, lesson learned. Don't look to your side." I'm like, the dude is in the semifinals of the 200. Like, what have you done? Like, I'm pretty sure you should be doing what Justin's doing, just not the drug part. But you can get to the finals. So. But yeah, it's been a fun Olympics. But we've got a fun interview for you guys. Actually, someone who we had in the office. So you're going to see Trey sitting where I am. And then David Bishop sitting where you are, chatting about running.
Yeah, so we bring you all types of people on the podcast, and this one is a guy who's kind of a friend of what we do, and he's got some really interesting running stories and how running has been instrumental to him over the years. And so we just thought he had some interesting stories, and he's got a book called Running Around the World. Boom. And it's interesting because the chapters are like only a couple of pages long each. It's got a quick little story and life lesson in it. So hey, hopefully you enjoy this week's and just hearing some stories from a friend. Hey, we all have those war stories and all have the funny stories that inspire us. So hopefully you get inspired by hearing David. And one of the key things we talk about David is you'll hear us talk a lot, run connected, running with others. That's what a lot of this is about with him. You'll hear how relationships and running relationships have been impacted him over the years. And so I think you'll hear that in this interview.
Yeah. So that's fun, guys. And we are starting some local chapters of the Connect Run Club. Yes, and so if you guys are interested at all in that, if you would just tweet at us at Connect Run Club, let us know, and we can get you more information. Or just hit us up on our Facebook group, connectrunclub.com/Facebook. And then the very last thing we want to let you guys know about before we get into the interview, we know this is a little bit long, is we have a half marathon in Athens, Georgia. On April the 1st, 2017. It's not an April Fool's joke. Nope. That might be our tagline. It's not a joke. And it's a blast. Is it our fourth annual? How many years have we done
this? It is our fourth.
Yeah.
But you never know where we're going to put the finish line this year.
Yeah, we change it. So the Chick-fil-A Connect Half Marathon, Athens, Georgia. We have a blast doing it, and we're letting you guys know that we're running a contest right now. And if you guys go to connectrunclub.com/half, it'll take you there, and you can win a free entry. So if you guys are in the Athens area or the East Coast, and you're interested in running a great race, we put it on, so we have a blast doing it. We'd love for you guys to join us.
We may put a medal around your neck.
We might say you win because we control. Yeah.
Yes.
You guys are our friends. So
you want a Boston qualifier? No, you can't do that.
We could technically do that. Yeah, you just did not hear that from us.
The fastest half marathon you've ever run. Yeah. See, there you go.
You have new incentive to come join. It's officially timed. All right. So, but no, guys, we're gonna have a blast and come check us out again. That's connectrunclub.com/half. But without further ado, let's jump into the interview with David Bishop as he runs around the world.
Well, David, welcome to the podcast. Excited to have you in the studio. This is exciting for me because usually I'm looking at people on this screen right here and not seeing them live in person. So it's good to have you in the studio today. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It's great to get to know you guys and to hear a little bit about your running background and what you do here at Connect Ministries.
Yeah, well, great. Well, like I said a little bit before we got started, we have just a wide variety of people who listen to the podcast. And so, sometimes we have some people on the podcast that they're like, oh, know exactly who that is. And then sometimes we have some nice surprises. So very excited to have you today. Just, getting to know you over lunch today, heard some really, really cool stories. So excited to let the listeners in on your background a little bit and how you got started in running and your book, Running Around the World, and introducing our runners to that a little bit. And then also, I know you've got a lot of years experience running. So also for some of our runners trying to get off the couch and trying to get started, and some of us runners that are trying to stay healthy as well. Maybe some tips near at the end that we can dive into that as well. So,
sure.
Well, hey, just kind of get us started here with what's your running background? When did you get started running? What got you into running? Can you just kind of give us your running story a little bit?
I like to think at this stage of my life that I have been a runner almost all my life.
There you go.
In one way or another, because, every child, when they become a toddler, they take off and run pretty quick, and their moms are chasing after them and so forth. So, I was no exception there. And as soon as I knew what baseball was, I was running the bases with a lot of glee. And as I added other sports to my athletic resume, football, basketball, there was not one single sport that allowed you just to sit around and didn't have running involved in some way or another. Sort of settled in on basketball in high school, and then after high school and college, and staying on church teams and that sort of thing into my 20s, you're always, out running on the basketball court.
Yep.
Then I started as a basketball official, and I would call up to 3 games a night and sometimes 5 on a Saturday.
Wow.
So you're doing a lot of running up and down a basketball court. I didn't take my first tentative steps in the wrong shoes and the wrong shorts and join the running boom of the 70s until pretty late in that decade, 78, 79, doing a mile or two here and there. And my family and I moved to Korea in 1981.
Okay.
And I had I was running 2-3 miles at a time and didn't have any racing goals or anything like that. But right after I got to Korea, my next door neighbor, who was another American, his name was Tom, and in the book he becomes known as my buddy Bubba.
Bubba, all right.
He had gotten started and was running 4 or 5 miles at a time, and so he pushed me to increase my mileage and keep up with him. We'd meet up every morning at about 6:30 and go run through the streets of Seoul.
Wow.
Through the pollution and the smog and behind the buses. I learned to hold my breath for up to 100 yards at a time, because these diesel buses that would be taking off from the bus stop about the time you ran up behind them, they'd shift gears and belch out a big cloud of diesel smoke, and you'd run through it. And so, we sort of learned to deal with the elements and the pollution and the traffic, and we just ran right in the street and played like we had fenders and ran all over the city. Pretty soon we saw there was going to be a Seoul International Marathon, and didn't run the first one because we weren't trained for it, but we went out and sort of chased a couple of the runners around the course and looked to watch them and so forth, and decided I would run it the next year.
So you got the bug for the marathon.
Bug, and
gotcha.
So 1983 ran my first marathon, the Seoul International Marathon, and trained pretty seriously for it. I guess my biggest training week was like 60 miles.
Okay, that's a lot of miles.
But the average, I got into probably 35, 40-mile weeks as my average training weeks. And, for some reason, all those hard training drills, all those coaches that use running as punishment in high school and so forth, they never turned me off to running. I just kind of could always do that. I was never fast, had those slow twitch muscle fibers that were dominant, but I could go for a long time. Yeah. So ran my first marathon in 1983, and then did 9 over the next 20 years or so.
Now, how did you dig into the training portion? Because me and you both know today we can Google and find about 5,000 different training plans. How did you kind of get to know what you needed to do as far as training went?
Well, as I said, Bubba and I ran every morning. Okay. We would do average 5-6 miles. We had some 7-8 mile routes that we did, and so it was just consistency, getting into a consistency. And we read the Runner's magazines pretty religiously back then. We'd Runner's World and Runner magazine and some of those that were available to us that we could get on the local Army post. And you'd read their training plans, but basically all I knew back then, and I guess I don't know that I've ever gotten into all of the latest training trends that are around today, but it was build a good base, have your base of mileage, your long, slow distance. We called it LSD back then. Exactly. I guess they still call it that.
Still the same.
And so we did a lot of LSD. Yep. We knew that we needed to do a little speed work, and then the long runs. And to this day, when I advise runners how to train for a marathon, I'm saying, well, depending on how fast you want to run it, you need to lay down that base you need to have a long run every week that you increase and build that up to the place where you think you're preparing for whatever your goals are. And then depending on how fast you want to go, this sounds kind of basic, but I tell them the only way to get faster is to run fast, practice running fast.
Yep. That's great. So you finished the first one?
Yeah.
Right. And so obviously you kind of wanted to do another one after you finished the first one, right?
Yeah. I finished the first one in, nobody ever forgets their first marathon time. Yeah. It was 3:23:13.
That's pretty good, David.
And,
that's pretty good.
And so I was pleased with it. You know, I had 3 goals going into that.
Okay.
The first was to finish.
You did that?
The second was to finish to finish so that I wanted to do another one.
Yeah, I understand that.
And the third was to finish under 3:30.
That's great.
So I met all 3 goals, and so immediately started thinking about another one. Mm-hmm. And Bubba and I started training for the 1984 Honolulu Marathon.
Wow.
And again, having read the runners magazines, which was all we had back then, and listening to whatever we could. We set a goal. I wanted to run sub 3 hour. That was the big goal for, again, I knew I was never going to be a 2:30 or less than 2:30 marathoner, but I guess is that still a mark of respectability these days? That if you can run a sub 3.
Sub 3 is impressive. Yeah.
Just to finish that one with less than 3s on the clock.
Yeah.
So we went to Honolulu in 1984, and actually, one of the stories in my book is called Sin in Honolulu.
Okay.
Because, there's a lot of definitions, a lot of words from the Hebrew language and so forth that translate as sin. But the one we hear a lot about is called missing the mark.
Okay.
Or to be absent.
Mm-hmm.
And that particular marathon, we were going to run it together and both break 3. Well, Bubba struggled early on in the first 8 miles. And also, we had 45-mile-an-hour wind gusts.
Well, that is tough.
And if anybody listening has ever run Honolulu, they might know that it's an out-and-back course that starts downtown Honolulu and runs to the east out to a place called Hawaii Kai on the eastern shore of Oahu. And it goes around the marina and comes back. Well, that day, all of the lead runners and even I ran what we call negative splits.
Yep.
The second half faster than the first, which is everyone knows is unusual in a marathon because you hit that wall and slow down at the end. So, but it was 45-mile-an-hour gusts going out and just fighting.
Was it in your face?
In your face.
Gotcha.
Going up over Diamond Head and out the other side and just all the way out. Then once we got it at our backs, we were going pretty good. And anyway, coming back up over Diamond Head, there's everybody knows about Heartbreak Hill, Boston.
Yep.
Well, they have a Heartbreak Hill in Honolulu too, and it's that backside of Diamond Head.
Okay.
And it's at about mile 24 something like that, and it goes for about a mile, 1.2 miles, rises about 100 feet, and so
it's gradual hill.
It's a gradual.
Gotcha.
It's steep going up.
Okay.
The other side, but it's gradual coming up from the east. And so going up over that hill, I was trying to do the math in my oxygen-starved brain. Could I still break 3 hours?
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't figure it out in my head because not enough oxygen was going there to do simple arithmetic.
I understand that.
Got over the top, down into the park where we would finish, and I saw a sign up in front of me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, it's the finish. Looked at my watch. I was at 2:56. I said, I could walk that last, to that sign in 4 minutes. So I'm going to make it. I got close enough to focus in on the sign and read it, and it said, "Smile, you only have half a mile to go."
Oh, no.
It was the photography point.
That's cruel, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. So there was no way, and I was at 2:57. I was not running a 6-minute pace to finish it. So I finished in 3 hours and 52 seconds.
Wow.
So, people say, well, you stayed with Bubba too long, or you had that 45-mile wind in your face. You didn't sleep well the night before because of the wind howling outside. Yep, a lot of good excuses or even reasons, but the fact is I was absent when the clock turned to 3. I sinned. I missed the mark. I didn't meet my goal. So anyway, that was the first attempt at 3, and I did make it later, but that was a big adventure and a very memorable run.
What were your favorite parts about that course?
Oh, the scenery is obviously beautiful all the way along the course, and when you're not suffering, you enjoy the scenery.
Yeah.
They had bands and a lot of entertainment. They had hula girls. They had there was a bagpipe playing at one point, which was very big contrast, to the tropical environment you're in. You got this Scotsman standing there playing a bagpipe.
Yeah.
But just the atmosphere, the encouragement along the way, big crowds out, and just the beautiful weather. It starts at 5 o'clock in the morning to beat the heat. So it's a great one.
Did you learn something in particular from those first couple? Because we'll jump on to the next. I know you broke 3 hours. Did you feel like you learned something in particular from the first two to help you break through that 3 hour mark eventually? Anything particular that stood out to you?
The first 4 I think I had run, I ran with sort of the macho attitude that you run. My marathon is to be run. And it's to be run, however you've trained and whatever kind of pace that you've planned, you're going to run that pace. And I did. And then I read an article where the 4-time Boston Marathon winner Bill Rogers talked about that in some of those races that he won, he walked sometimes. He ran different paces. He slowed down. He speeded up. He said, and he even walked at a few points. And I thought, if the guy that won the Boston Marathon can walk and win it, I guess I could walk toward trying to meet some of my goals. And so I developed a strategy from that point on, and this became one of my best practices, and I've taught it to others and my kids and everybody since, is to walk the water stops.
I'm right with you.
And anybody that's run a marathon knows those water stops, those aid stations are usually about 200 yards long.
Yep.
It feels like you run 200 miles by the time you get to some of them, but you run into that station and they stretch it out so you won't bunch up at one table, and you grab your water, swig it down quick, and maybe drink some sports drink. But I got to the point where I would, the first 2 or 3 tables, I would grab the water and walk, and I would drink that down fast. Then I'd grab another cup of sports drink. I'd take long strides, stretch out the quad muscles, I wouldn't stop. I would just keep walking and taking long strides, short strides, maybe skip a little bit. And then by the time I got to that last table, throw that cup down and take off again at whatever pace I was in. And I found it gave me that little break, something to look forward to. And it kept me going at a more constant pace between the water stops.
It's interesting. We had Joe Friel on the podcast the other day, and he owned one of the first running stores in the country. I mean, that was going to be my next question to you. What did you know, and what did you have to learn about running shoes and so forth? I mean, what were you running in at first, and how was that changed over the years for you?
Well, again, living in Korea, at that time in the 1980s, Korea was the place where most of the world's running shoes were being manufactured.
Okay.
And there was a little shopping area there near the Army base called Itaewon. And they had all of the, whether it was a little defective or some that people just carried out of the factory to sell locally, they could sell a certain percentage locally.
Okay.
So we were in runner shoe heaven back then because we could have 8 or 10 pair of nice running shoes at any time. But in those days, I settled in on some Converse shoes, which I don't even see Converse shoes these days. Yeah. But Arthur Lydiard, who was a well-known, I think, New Zealander running coach from back in those years, there was a Converse Lydiard. Really? It was very lightweight but had a sturdiness to it. And I ran, I guess, my fastest marathons in those lightweight Converse Lydiards.
Have you seen a big trend? Were most of the running shoes very similar back then? Or was there a wide variety of styles even back then, or were most shoes pretty similar?
I think they were more similar then, obviously,
Okay.
than now. They didn't have the ones that are built for stability or for supinators or pronators. And learned over the years, I'm a supinator.
You are,
which is
that's
a
unusual,
smaller
right?
percentage
Yeah.
of us. You know, I wear out the right, the outside of my heels
Yep.
quicker than anywhere else, and so. You know, we just learned which shoes we're going to wear, which ways, and how they felt. But I remember back in the late '80s, I guess they came out with the New Balance. I think it was called the 110 or something like that, and it cost $100. That was the first $100 running shoe, and now, you know, those are really
Now
common.
get used to it, right?
But and I got some of those, but they wore fast on me for some reason. They weren't built for me. I got them because of the prestige of it, I guess, but they didn't wear that great for me. I've run in a lot of New Balance over the years, but that particular shoe it wore. In fact, another story in my book is called "Read Your Soul," SOLE, and "Guard Your Soul," SOUL. And so I refer to some of the scripture verses that talk about staying on the straight, you know, and going neither right nor left and that sort of thing. But talking about how, you know, as a runner, you need to look at the bottom of your shoes and see where the wear patterns are. And when you go buy running shoes, if you start talking about I'm a supinator or I'm a pronator and you get a deer in the headlights look from the sales guy or the sales girl, you might want to go do a little more research or move on somewhere else, because it's important to buy shoes that fit your foot strike.
Now, the book is running around the world, so obviously you've run all over the world. You talked about some of the most unique runs that you've done, interesting runs.
Yeah, the book, I came up with the title because over the last 35 years, by my most conservative calculations, I have run over 30,000 miles.
Wow.
And we learned back in earth science class that it's about 25,000 around the world.
Yep.
And so I've run the distance around the world one stride at a time.
Yeah.
But I've been really blessed and fortunate to have lived and worked in several places around the world, and probably traveled in and worked, done projects in about 50 countries. And in probably 45 of those or more, I've been able to go for a run once or twice.
Yeah.
And so it's a double meaning. I've run around the world, and I've run all around the world.
Yeah.
And you're right, I've had some pretty unique experiences. One of my favorite sections in the book is called "I'm Directionally Challenged." So this one's very apropos.
So you're admitting that.
I'm
now?
admitting
All
that.
right.
If I didn't
That's
admit
good.
it, my kids or my wife would chime in or call in and say, "Hey, he can't find his way to the office." But
It makes for some interesting runs, though.
yeah, it does. I've got one called "Forks in the Road," where I. One of the quotes there is the famous Yogi Berra quote, "When you come to a fork in the road, take it." And I was out running in England one time. We had lived in this area for a while, but we had moved away, and I was back through there over a weekend, traveling in from the Middle East, and I was exhausted. So I slept in Saturday morning, but I was training to do the Honolulu again with my daughter, who was in the Army and stationed in Hawaii. And I needed a long run, but I didn't want to do anything too long. I was going to do about a 12-miler that afternoon. So I went out and I got outside the little town where we used to live. But when you get out there, some of those country lanes, they look the same. Yeah. And it's like suburbs here, but it's suburbs of suburbs, and you got all these names that quickly you've never seen before unless you really knew that area. And I came to a fork in the road, and I took Yogi's advice. I took it.
There you go.
I saw two unfamiliar names, and I went the way that I thought looked the least unfamiliar. And instead of a 12-miler, I ended up doing about a 17-miler that day, which I needed. Yeah. For my preparation, so it wasn't a really bad thing, but getting lost can. But my that favorite section in the book is called "Sir Lost a Lot, Falls Down a Lot Too." Had another time when a mutual friend of ours and I were sharing an apartment in Almaty, Kazakhstan for
How about that?
3 or 4 days. He was moving on to do something in Siberia the next week, and my wife was coming in, and we were going to stay there and work on a project for a couple of weeks. But I went out for a 5-miler one morning and should have been back in 45 minutes. He had a taxi picking himself up to go for a flight, and anyway, he opened the door to the apartment when I got back, and I'm standing there a bloody mess. I'm scraped from head to toe, and he's saying, "Bish, what in the world happened to you?" And because he was expecting me back, and he had a taxi waiting. He couldn't wait, and he had the only key to the apartment, so he didn't want to lock me out. Yeah. And he's thinking his friend's going to bleed to death, but he couldn't wait and help me. I said, "I'll go on. I'll be okay after a little alcohol and a shower and apply some alcohol." Well, I had tripped on a piece of exposed rebar while I was running downhill at a pretty good, probably a 7-minute pace. And when I went down, my left arm, I caught myself on the heel of my left hand with my arm stiff, and it's transferred all of that, my weight at that speed all the way up to my shoulder. And by the time I took a shower and got cooled off, and by that evening I had no more than 6-inch range of motion anywhere, and to this day, if I leave that arm crooked too long, it's stiff. But what was terrible about that, the main thing made me so mad was I tripped on the same piece and fell down the day before.
Oh no.
That day I had employed the old basketball roll and just got a little bruise on my back. Yep. But that second day I did some damage. And, I learned a lesson that is kind of what happens to us in life. Sometimes we make a mistake. We trip up on things. We fall down. We make mistakes. Hopefully we learn from it. But where we do the greatest damage is when we come back over the same ground and we hit that same hazard and we trip again. And sometimes the second time, even though some of those scrapes and bruises will heal in a week, we do some deep damage that 20 years later is still causing us problems. So, these are the kind of things I've had great running experiences around the world, and I've had chance to see things and meet people and get lost and fall down. But, God's taught me a lot of lessons as I've pounded the pavement and as I've run along the roads, and it's been a neat thing to be able to write those down over the last year, and now finally get them into a book form, so I can share them with my family, leave something to them when I'm not around to tell stories anymore, and hopefully a few other people will be able to identify with these stories.
And talk to us about running with people for a few minutes. One of our tagline at Connect Run Club is Run Connected. We talk about that a lot, and I know what it's meant to me over the years, but know you've mentioned Bubba, I know you mentioned others, but talk to us about what relationships and running with others has kind of meant to you over the years.
Well, again, there's a lot of stories in my book about Bubba. One of the early ones is called Bubba's Bathroom Light. We lived in houses that were next to each other, and our bathrooms were on facing ends.
Okay.
And we had a standing meetup every morning about 6:30, and we'd meet out in front and then go out the gate of our housing area and explore. I would get up every morning about 6:10 and stand in my bathroom, in a dark bathroom, and I'd wait for his light to come on. And when it did, then I'd go get dressed and get ready to go out and meet him. If it didn't come on, I'd go crawl back in bed, kind of like a college student, waiting for the professor to not show up after 10 minutes so he could leave.
Yep.
Well, that went on for months. Mm-hmm. And one day I finally confessed to him what I was doing. He said, "Are you kidding me? That's what I've been doing." He said, "I'd stand in my bathroom waiting on your light to come on." So there were lots of days that we missed out on that chance to run and get a good workout and have that fellowship. But over the years, we did meet up enough that we formed a really close relationship and just got to know each other. You shared a lot on those runs, running at conversational pace, and And we got to be close. We're friends 30 years later, living in different places and have been in different countries even. We had another younger guy that ran with us a lot, and his name was John, and he was younger, lighter, stronger legs, should have been faster than we were, but we would kid him that you're not as wily and cunning as we are. and so we would torment him. It was all in good fun, but we would do a thing we call the blow-by.
Yeah.
Can you know what I mean when I'm talking about a blow-by, or
yeah.
you can imagine?
I get your meaning. Yeah. Explain, though.
Well, in a race, and I've taught this to my kids over the years, and now my grandkids.
Yep.
When you're coming up on an opponent from behind and you're gaining ground on them, I learned early on, and I've teach them, you don't want to just creep up on them and try to go around slow, because they're going to see you out of their peripheral vision. It's going to motivate them to pick up the pace and keep going. So what I learned to do, and we would, you'd hang back about 10 yards right behind them so they don't see you.
Yeah.
You kind of you get a few deep breaths, wait for maybe 15, 20 seconds, gathering your strength, and then you put the hammer down and sprint by them. And what I would do is I would go by, and when I got right even with their ear, I would blow out a sharp breath. So they weren't sure if that was the wind of my speed making that breath or what it was. And you keep going as hard as you can go for another till you're 10 or 15 yards ahead of them.
That's great.
I have never had anybody try to go with me in my racing days when I went by them that fast. And so John, a lot of mornings, he would get frisky and open up a 20, 25-yard lead on Bubba and me going through the streets of Seoul. And at some point, we'd look at each other and kind of nod. One would nod at the other, and we'd grin. And that was our signal for a blow-by. So we'd wait for the time to be right, and he somehow never suspected that we were going to do this. But we would creep up, and from about 10 yards behind, we would blow by him, and not only blow by and blow out that breath, we would graze both of his shoulders as we sandwiched him. It would scare him to death every time, and he would be shaking his fist and yelling about you crazy old men, and we'd be laughing so hard he'd catch up pretty quick. But then he'd follow us home like a well-trained puppy that got caught chewing our slippers. But, just the fun that you have and things like the joy and the memories. Now, probably the deepest relationships have been with my daughters.
I was going to ask about that. You crossed the finish line of the marathon with both of them, right, at one point in time?
At one point. But the most valuable times were, and in fact, for this book, all I asked them for Christmas last year was to write a short half-page foreword for me, and I was not prepared for what they would write, but they both talked about the years that we ran together when they were running cross country in high school. They're 4 years apart, so it was 8 years of being able to run with them, one or the other being in high school. And my younger daughter dubbed those runs Life 101 because, these days kids have so many distractions. They've got, they got their school, they've got sports, they've got music clubs, they've got friends parties, they've got so many things, church activities, things that pull them out of the house and away by the time they're teenagers. And if that weren't enough, now we had all that 20 years ago when our girls were teenagers, but what we didn't have was smartphones and tablets. Yeah. And today, that can fill in every other waking second, that kids are around. So you get out on a run and you don't have your smartphone with you usually. So we would get out and we would talk about things, about their friends, their struggles, their school subjects, their sports, later their plans for college, boyfriends, proposals for marriage, then kids and career changes. And now we still run every chance we get if we're together. And now I learn from them. I'm learning from their life experiences, and And so that has been a bond that we've had as father-daughter, and my wife has done some of that as well with us, and we've got great memories of just the whole family running together, and so Life 101 and the time with kids. I think if you want a best practice of anything I've learned running, and anybody that's listening to this, you got kids and they're coming along and they are interested at all in running, run with them. Get in shape so you can keep up with your kids.
That's the truth. Yeah, I will tell you, I'm right with you. The candid, I did a trail run with my 13-year-old this past weekend, and the things you can talk about in an hour and a half on the trail.
My older daughter confided to her aunt one time when she was in college. She said, I got to be careful when I run with Dad because I kind of get out there and get hot and loose, and I start to spill my guts, and I'm afraid I'm going to tell him stuff I don't want to tell him.
That's great. Hey, what can you? A couple of things that I love to get before we wrap up. I would love to kind of get your thoughts on staying healthy, and it's something that a lot of us have to battle, and I'm sure you over the years kind of had to battle the same thing. Any recommendations and suggestions for things that kept you healthy over the years?
I think knowing the difference in the kind of pain that you just got to gut it out and work through, and the kind that could be doing some damage. And I don't know how to teach that. I think that comes with some experience and with probably listening to the wrong thing or not reading it right a couple of times. But when you've torn something, or when you've got some cartilage that's scraping in ways it shouldn't scrape, and it's doing more damage to keep running, you need to back off. But then you need to know when I just don't feel good, or whenever I've just got a little ache or a little nagging hamstring that I can run through. Knowing when you can run through. One of my stories is called "The Pros Play Hurt," and so that's kind of been an attitude, and one I've taught my kids is that you keep going until you know that you're about to do some damage. Then you back off. And I've been very fortunate through the years to have not had too many injuries that sidelined me for a long time. I did have to spend about a year off one time. I'll tell you what I did learn. The last major layoff I had was about 10 years ago. Okay. And I haven't raced for quite a long time. I stopped racing, I guess, in my early 50s. Okay. But I had a torn meniscus in my left knee, that area. And I went to see an orthopedic surgeon. He said, only less than 5% of people ever have anything heal in that area without surgery. And he said, because there's just very little blood flow, blood supply to that cartilage. And so I scheduled it, but I was working in China at the time and only getting home about every 3 months and spending about 2 weeks. My daughter is a physical therapist. She said, well, Dad, you need a good 3 weeks. And he said, too, you got to have 3 weeks of rehab. And I never found time to get home for the surgery. Wow. But I was walking a lot. And my apartment in China was about a mile and a half from my office, so I walked both ways. At night, I would go out to eat something and often have to walk a mile and a half, 2 miles to where I would get something to eat. So I was walking 5, 6, 7 miles a day. My daughter, again, she said, well, Dad, you're doing the right things for when you have the surgery. Your rehab will go better because you've done all this walking. Yeah. Well, I never found time to get home. So what I did was one day I said, I'm not hurting right now. I wonder if I could throw in runs of a minute or two in the middle of a 2 or 3 mile walk. Right. So I started doing that. And I took a long time. It's more discipline, I guess, than I've ever shown. Yeah. I spent probably 2 months building up to where I'd run 1 minute in the middle of a 3 mile walk, and next time I'd run two different 1 minute segments. Later on, I'd run 8, and I'd say, "Hey, I'm running a mile again." Yeah, yeah. and then eventually got to where I came back to running 3-4 miles pain free. I never had the surgery.
That's amazing.
Now, another of that knee is still there. One of my stories in the book is called Conversations with My Knee. So if I ever get tempted to start racing again or running the longer runs, it talks to me, and we have some mostly civil conversations, but it screamed and cursed at me a few times.
Yeah, my dad had total knee replacement, and he wishes he could go back in time and not do that. So I get that. So, hey, as we wrap up, we'd love to kind of get your thoughts. One of the last, probably one of those popular questions we get. I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot, David. What about motivation? A lot of people have a hard time getting out there, and especially right now. I mean, it's like running on the sun right this minute. What kind of things would you tell people who are just having a hard time getting out off the sofa and getting out the door right this minute?
Again, I'm sorry to have so many references, but I guess I've ended up having a story, and I've written about most of these things.
You have stories. I love it.
And one of my pieces is called The Logic of Suffering.
Okay.
And it's based on the scripture where Peter writes and says, "What good does it do you if you are persecuted or get a beating for doing something bad? You did something bad."
Yeah.
He said, "But if you do something good and you suffer for it, then there's some, you get some credit there."
Yeah.
That's my paraphrase. Well, in exercise, I talk about the logic of suffering. If you suffer a little bit, if you're a runner, if you become a runner, you're going to hurt a little bit. You're going to have a few injuries. You're going to have some pain. You're going to have some soreness. And that's going to be maybe ongoing, or it's going to come at different times. But you're going to have so many other benefits from it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be 66 later this month, and I've got a resting heart rate of 44.
It's beautiful.
And last time I got a physical, they told me I had the blood pressure of a 17-year-old. So, the benefits are that motivates me, but I couldn't start there.
Sure.
But what I wrote in this piece is that there used to be an old car oil filter commercial where the mechanic had just replaced somebody's engine, and he would turn to the screen talking about how this guy had changed his oil filter. He could have spent $4 or $5, but he spent a couple $1,000 on a new engine.
Yeah.
And he'd turn and he'd say, "You can pay me now or pay me later." And if you don't exercise, and running is my thing, it's your thing. Yeah. It's not everybody's thing. Yeah. Fast walking, swimming, play ping pong, do something that gets you active, that makes you sweat a little bit from now and then. But if you don't do anything and you suddenly find yourself 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, you're going to suffer from, it could be heart disease, it could be diabetes, it could be sleep apnea, it could be, all kinds of things that you'll suffer.
Yep.
And so what good does it do you to suffer for neglecting your health for years? But if you suffer for doing a little exercise now and then that's to your credit, because you're going to be better off. And Peter wasn't talking about exercise; he was talking about our spiritual lives. But I think there's a lesson there in both ways.
I agree. David Bishop, running around the world. We're going to have we'll have a link to Amazon in the book in the show notes. It's a really good book. Very, very. I like it because it's very bite-sized chunks. You can read one every day. So be sure and check it out. David, any other place that they can follow along? Again, we'll put the link in the show notes, but any other places you would encourage people to follow you along?
I'd love to have people follow me on Twitter.
Okay.
At Runners Chaplain.
Okay. We'll be sure to put that in the show notes too.
And then I've got a Facebook page that's also Runners Chaplain, and I post on both of those just some encouragement, some pictures, some scripture verses with some pictures that go along with it, some thoughts, some experiences, and just I'd love to interact with people in that way.
Sounds great. And Brandon's looking at me. I know we need to wrap it up, but one more quick question. We'll keep it short. Favorite race experience? Do you have a favorite race experience looking back on all the races you've done?
Probably in the Boston Marathon when you run through the Wellesley Scream Tunnel at Wellesley College, where you've got couple thousand Wellesley girls
That's great.
out screaming and giving you all the encouragement in the world as you go through that sort of half-mile place. You have a left turn pretty sharp out at the end of that, and I call it the Wellesley slingshot, because when I went in there, I was feeling pretty bad. When I came out, I took off like a shot toward Boston, but of course I slowed down again later. Yeah.
Great. Well, awesome. Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the studio today, and it's been great to talk with you, and thanks for telling some stories with us today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, David.